My name is Emily Carter, and I always thought Christmas was supposed to be a time when families, no matter how bruised or battered by the year's hardships, found a way to wrap their wounds in a patchwork of forgiveness. But if I'm honest, in my family, Christmas was less about comfort and joy and more about uneasy truces and silent bargains. We wore our matching sweaters for the camera, smiled for relatives who'd flown in for the day, but underneath the tinsel and tradition was something brittle, something that cracked a little more each year. I'd grown used to it, or so I believed, accepting my role as the one who was different, the one who colored outside the lines of my parents' carefully drawn expectations. But that year, something shifted. I could feel it in the small, deliberate ways I was left out, like an extra place setting nobody wanted to acknowledge. There wasn't one single blow, no dramatic fight, no shouting matches echoing down the halls. It was a slow, almost elegant exclusion, the kind that creeps in, quiet as a draft under a closed door. I first noticed it in November, when the family group messages started pinging on my sister's phone while mine stayed silent. Plans for decorating the new house, choosing the color scheme for the tree, even the menu for Christmas dinner, all decided in my absence. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe they had set up a new group and forgotten to add me. Maybe I'd been busy with work and missed a few texts. But as the weeks wore on and the messages never came, my excuses grew thinner, more transparent, even to myself. The new house itself was supposed to be a fresh start. My parents had talked about it for months, how a change of scenery would bring us closer, how this was the home where we'd build new memories. When the moving van arrived, I showed up with boxes of childhood things, my old snow globe collection, and the last of my high school yearbooks. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the place where I belonged, where the weight of not being enough would finally ease up, if only for a few days. But even before I set foot inside, I could sense the coldness. I'd offered to help decorate, even brought a box of homemade ornaments. But when I arrived, the tree was already trimmed, the garlands perfectly hung, my sister's name on the stocking I'd always thought of as mine. My mother barely glanced up from arranging candles on the mantel, and my father greeted me with a distracted, "Oh, you made it." I stood in the entryway, clutching the box like a lifeline, my offer to help hanging between us until my mother finally said, "We've got it covered, Em, just relax." It hurt, more than I wanted to admit, but I pushed it down, telling myself that it was just stress, just the exhaustion of moving and the holidays colliding. I went upstairs to the guest room, which was now officially mine, though it looked more like a hotel suite than a bedroom, a place to visit, not to stay. I stared at the blank, neutral walls and wondered where all my things would fit, if they'd ever fit at all. In the days leading up to Christmas, the house buzzed with activity, but I was always on the edges, orbiting around the real action like a forgotten planet. My sister and her fiancé took charge of everything: the music, the lights, the menu. Even when I offered to help cook or set the table, I was met with polite dismissals. "We've got this, Em, just enjoy yourself." I tried. God, I tried to enjoy myself. I tried to laugh at my father's bed jokes, to smile at the stories my mother rattled every year, to ask my sister about her new job, even though she answered with the same vague politeness she reserved for strangers. I tried not to notice the way they all seemed to move in step with one another, an unspoken choreography from which I'd been gently, but unmistakably, excluded. The day before Christmas, I found myself alone in the kitchen rolling out dough for gingerbread cookies, a tradition Grandma started when I was 8. It was something I could do with my eyes closed, the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg, the feel of the rolling pin under my palms, the way the dough would crack if you didn't add just enough molasses. I'd always made them for my grandmother, who claimed they were better than any bakery in town. But that year, as I cut out shapes and laid them on the tray, I wondered if she'd even notice. If anyone would. I placed them in the oven and set the timer, letting the warmth of the kitchen fill the empty space inside me. I told myself I was overreacting, that families go through phases, that maybe it was just my turn to be on the outside looking in. I told myself that next year, things would be different, that the ache of being left out would fade, the way old bruises eventually do. But deep down, a small stubborn part of me refused to believe it. That part of me kept replaying the group messages I never got, the decorating party I never attended, the subtle, deliberate ways I'd been made invisible. By the time Christmas dinner arrived, I was exhausted, emotionally spent from days of smiling through clenched teeth. The house looked perfect, glowing with fairy lights and the kind of forced cheer you see in holiday movies. I put on my best dress and joined the family in the dining room, only to find my seat at the far end of the table, as far from the center of the action as possible. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the little place card with my name in my mother's careful script, set apart from everyone else's. I took my seat and tried to blend in. Tried to pretend I didn't notice the way the conversation floated past me like I wasn't even there. Dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation, laughter that never quite reached my end of the table, and the familiar ache of longing for something I couldn't even name. I watched my sister bask in the glow of approval, my parents leaning in to hear her every word. The pride in their eyes so bright it nearly blinded me. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was fine, that I didn't need anyone's approval to know my worth. But as the plates were cleared and dessert was brought out, I couldn't help but wonder when I'd become a stranger in my own family. It was then, as the first slices of pie were served and the chatter swelled, that my grandmother looked at me, her eyes warm and knowing, and asked the question that would change everything. "Did you like the new house?" Her voice was gentle, but her words hung in the air like a challenge, drawing every eye in the room to me. For a moment, I was sure I'd misheard. The room fell silent, forks hovering in midair, conversation grinding to a halt. I looked around, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, but all I saw were the guilty, nervous faces of my parents, the pale, pinched look on my sister's face. My heart hammered in my chest as the realization slowly dawned, a cold, creeping certainty that whatever I'd felt all season was just the tip of something much deeper and much more painful. I tried to speak, to answer, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was sit there, staring at my grandmother, trying to understand what she meant, trying to ignore the growing suspicion that the house, the one she'd promised me, the one she'd told me was mine, had somehow slipped through my fingers without my even knowing. That was the moment when the thin veneer of family unity cracked wide open, and as the truth started to seep through, I felt something in me begin to shift, a quiet, gathering strength I didn't know I still had. It's strange, the way a single question can rearrange the entire world inside your head. One moment you're playing your part, smiling, nodding, pretending not to notice the small cruelties, the unspoken exclusions, and the next, you realize that everyone else at the table has been living in a different reality than yours. When my grandmother asked if I liked the new house, I felt every muscle in my body lock up, as if a winter wind had swept right through me. I sat there, a forkful of untouched pie trembling in my hand, while my family, my own family, looked everywhere but at me. For a few impossible seconds, I hoped it was some mix-up. Maybe Grandma had meant the new curtains, or the backyard she knew I'd always wanted. Maybe she'd confused me with my sister, as she sometimes did when tired. But the room told another story. My parents exchanged a glance, one of those silent, fast glances that say everything words don't. My sister's face, usually so composed, drained of color. Even my grandmother's smile seemed to falter, confusion flickering behind her eyes, as she realized I wasn't part of the story everyone else had agreed on. I cleared my throat, a tiny, broken sound, and managed a shaky, "What new house?" The words felt fragile, so out of place in the thick, heavy silence that settled over the table. It was as if the clinking of dishes, the laughter from moments before, belonged to a different home entirely. No one answered right away. My father busied himself with his wine glass, swirling the last bit around as if it might reveal the right response. My mother pretended to fuss with the centerpiece, her lips pressed in a tight line. My sister stared down at her plate, cheeks burning, her hands gripping the edges like she might fall off the earth if she let go. It was my grandmother who broke the silence, her voice more tentative now, the warmth edged with worry. "Darling, your parents told me you were moving in after graduation. I wanted it to be a surprise, but," she trailed off, uncertainty crumpling her words, "the house was for you. I just wanted you to feel secure, to have a place that was yours." Something inside me buckled. I remembered that conversation, how, years ago, when I was floundering my way through college, Grandma had pulled me aside and said, "One day, this will all be yours." A house is more than a roof. It's a promise, a place where you're never unwelcome. That promise had become a secret comfort, a quiet reassurance I'd carried through every disappointment. Every moment I felt like the odd piece in a puzzle I could never finish. Now I sat in this bright, beautiful dining room, and The truth pressed in from all sides. The house wasn't mine. It never had been. Finally, my mother looked up, her eyes rimmed with a defensiveness I recognized too well. Emily, we tried to tell you, but you were so busy with your job and your friends. You never seemed interested in settling down and, well, your sister needed it more. She's starting a family soon, you understand, don't you? Her words landed on me like frost, every syllable heavy with justification. Every excuse a little dagger disguised as logic. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman who made my lunches and kissed scraped knees with the one who could erase me from something so big, so meaningful. Without a word, my father jumped in. His voice too loud, brittle with the effort of making it all sound reasonable. We thought you'd rather travel, explore, do your own thing. You're not like us. You never have been. We just didn't want to tie you down. I wanted to scream that they'd never asked what I wanted, that all my exploring was just searching for a place to belong, for approval that never seemed to come. But I didn't. The old part of me, the peacemaker, the forgiver, kept my voice steady, even as my hands shook under the table. So you gave it to her, I said quietly, without telling me. You just decided. My sister finally looked up, her eyes shining with something like shame. Emily, I didn't know how to tell you. They said you didn't care, that you weren't ready for the responsibility. I believed them. I shouldn't have. But I did. I'm sorry. There it was, the raw truth, exposed and bleeding. I felt both hollow and furiously alive, the shock of betrayal ringing in my chest. My family had not only given away my future, they'd painted me as too irresponsible, too different, too much for something as simple as a home. The rest of dinner unraveled. Conversation tried to pick up again, weather, work, vacation plans, but every sentence was brittle, punctuated by glances and long silences. My appetite vanished, replaced by a cold stone of grief and anger. I felt myself withdrawing further, curling up somewhere deep inside where no one could reach. After dessert, I slipped away from the table and wandered into the living room, sitting alone in the glow of the tree lights. Every ornament felt like a memory of when things made sense, when belonging wasn't a negotiation. I thought of all the ways I'd tried to prove myself, every on a report card, every thankless chore, every careful word spoken so I wouldn't seem too rebellious or too needy, and now, none of it had mattered. My worth had been weighed and found lacking, not because of who I was, but because I refused to fit the narrow space my parents made for me. My grandmother joined me, her steps slow but steady. She sat beside me, her hand finding mine in the quiet. I'm sorry, Emily, she whispered. I thought this would make things better. I wanted you to know you always have a place. I never meant for it to hurt you. Tears prickled behind my eyes. The kind you fight because you don't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing you break. You didn't hurt me, Grandma, I said softly. You kept your promise. They're the ones who, I don't even know how to feel. I just don't understand why. She squeezed my hand, her grip strong despite her age. Families are strange things. People do selfish, fearful things and call it love. I should have made it clearer, put it in writing. I should have trusted you to decide for yourself. Her words washed over me. A bomb and a wound at once. I thought of the house, of how I'd imagined choosing curtains, planting flowers, inviting friends over for tea. I wondered if my parents had ever pictured me there, or if they'd written that future out of the story long before tonight. As the night wore on, I stayed in the living room, the quiet punctuated only by the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Occasionally, I heard snippets of conversation from the kitchen, my mother's hushed voice, my sister's tearful apology, my father's frustration. But I stayed where I was, unwilling to walk back into a space that no longer felt mine. Later, as I lay in the unfamiliar guest room, I replayed the evening again and again, searching for signs I'd missed. Maybe this was always inevitable. Maybe I'd always been the one they didn't know what to do with. But lying there, with the echo of my grandmother's promise still lingering in the air, I felt something begin to harden inside me. Not bitterness, exactly, but resolve. If I was going to be cast out, I would do it on my own terms. I wouldn't beg for a place at the table anymore. I wouldn't apologize for wanting what was promised to me. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows melted into dawn, the ache of betrayal throbbing beneath my ribs. I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would not let this define me. I would not be erased, and somewhere in the spaces between grief and anger, I found the faintest outline of strength, the kind that comes when you realize you're all you have left, and somehow, that's enough to begin again. When you lose something you never actually held, it's a peculiar kind of grief There's nothing to point to, nothing to bury, nothing to rage against except for the promise itself, the hope you'd cradled quietly for years, in the days after that Christmas dinner. I found myself trapped in a fog of memories, moments that seemed, all at once, tender and mocking, reminders of everything I thought I knew about my place in the world. The house had always been a symbol, but more than that, it was a tether. My grandmother, with her soft laugh and strong will, used to say that every family needed an anchor, a place where you could return, no matter how lost you felt, and be reminded of who you were before life tried to reshape you. For as long as I can remember, she was the one who noticed when I was quiet, who pressed a warm cup of tea into my hands when the rest of the world demanded answers. When my parents talked about achievements and stability, Grandma talked about dreams. When I stumbled, she caught me. When I wanted to run away, she told me it was okay to come back. That's why her promise of the house meant so much. It wasn't about the bricks or the square footage or the neighborhood's reputation. It was about believing that someone saw me, truly saw me, and thought I was worth rooting for. The first time she brought it up, I was 19, still wobbling under the weight of adult choices. I'd just changed majors for the third time, convinced I'd never find a path that would make sense to anyone but me. I'd come home for spring break, ashamed and uncertain, and I sat at the kitchen table while she rolled out biscuit dough. She didn't ask for details or offer the kind of advice that sounds more like judgment. Instead, she patted flour from her hands and looked at me with clear, steady eyes. Someday, she said, I'm going to give you a house. Not just any house, a place that will always be yours. No matter what mess you make of your life, because I know, Emmy, you'll figure it out in your own way, and when you do, I want you to have a space that's yours, a foundation. Every girl deserves that much. It was so unlike anything my parents would have said. So unconditional, so quietly revolutionary, that I nearly cried right there on the linoleum. Over the years, the promise of that house became the place I retreated to in my mind when life felt too sharp, too loud. When my parents doubted my choices, when they called my jobs just a phase or my passions impractical, I clung to the knowledge that someone had faith in me. The house became a shorthand for hope. Someday, when I have my own place, someday, when Grandma keeps her promise. It was never about entitlement. It was about reassurance. In a family where belonging always felt conditional, the house was a love letter written in wood and stone. That's what made its loss so profound. It wasn't just the realization that my sister now lived in the space I'd spent years dreaming about, that she'd chosen pink colors and curtains and made it hers. It was that my family had rewritten the story of who I was, behind my back, and handed that story to her. To them, I was too reckless, too unreliable, too different to trust with anything that mattered. They had not only stolen a home, they'd taken the narrative of my life and given it to someone who fit better in their eyes. The first morning after Christmas, I walked through the neighborhood alone, snow crunching under my boots, trying to outrun the ache that followed me everywhere. The world was bright and glittering, a postcard of holiday cheer, but I felt like a ghost passing through someone else's celebration. Every house I passed looked like a closed circle, families laughing behind fogged-up windows, wreaths on every door, children tumbling in backyards. I wondered if those families had their own secrets, if every perfect house hid the kind of wounds that mine did. When I came back, my sister's car was gone, but her presence lingered in every corner. Her boots by the door, her perfume in the hallway, her laughter echoing from last night's dinner. My parents moved around each other in the kitchen, their voices low and brittle, the air thick with things unsaid. I tried to make small talk, tried to be civil, but every word felt like a performance. I could see the relief in their faces when I finally retreated to the guest room. That afternoon, Grandma called. I almost didn't pick up, afraid I'd break down and say something I couldn't take back. But when I heard her voice, steady, gentle, threaded through with concern, I felt some of my defenses slip away. She didn't ask how I was, she just listened, filling the silences with small comforts. I know it hurts, Emmy, she said, after a long pause, but I want you to remember something. What they did says nothing about your worth. People can be selfish, even when they think they're protecting you. You're not the problem. Don't let them make you believe that. For a second, her words felt like warm hands pressed to a bruise. I wanted to believe her, but the part of me that still craved my parents' approval twisted in protest. I told her so, my voice breaking. I just wanted them to want me, to see me. I would have shared with her. I never needed it to be just Mine. I just wanted them to ask. I know, Grandma replied softly. That's what hurts the most. But listen, sweetheart, promises matter. And I put it in writing. You may not have known it, but that house is yours until you say otherwise. I made sure of it. I thought it would make things easier. Maybe I was wrong. But I want you to know you still have a choice. Her words caught me off guard. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt a flicker of something besides hurt and almost fearful hope, a sense that maybe the story wasn't quite finished. I asked her to explain. And she told me about the clause she'd insisted on when she gifted the house, that nothing could be transferred without my explicit, written consent, that no matter what my parents had signed, no matter what my sister believed, the law was clear, the house was still mine whether I wanted it or not. It was a strange comfort, this knowledge. Not the triumphant victory I might have imagined, but a quiet vindication that I wasn't as invisible as they'd made me feel. My grandmother, for all her gentleness, had more spine than any of them. She'd trusted me when no one else had. After the call, I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The idea of confronting my parents, of forcing them to admit what they'd done, filled me with dread. I hated conflict. I'd spent my whole life trying to avoid it, smoothing things over, making myself small enough to go unnoticed. But now, with the truth in my hands, I realized that not standing up for myself would mean losing something much more important than a house. It would mean accepting the version of me they'd created, letting their judgment become the truth. For the first time, I let myself feel the full sweep of anger, not just at my parents or my sister, but at myself. For all the years I'd accepted less than I deserved, I thought about every slight, every dismissal, every time I'd let them define me as difficult or unreliable or not enough. I thought about how tired I was of carrying that weight, how much I wanted to set it down. That night, as snow fell softly outside, I made a decision. I would not let this be another silent wound. I would not let them take something that was never theirs to give. And as I drifted to sleep, I whispered a promise to myself, a new kind of promise, stronger and sharper than the old ones. Whatever happened next, I would not be erased. There's a kind of silence that falls after a wound is opened in public, a hush so total it feels almost sacred, a moment when everyone holds their breath, unsure if the world has changed forever or if, somehow, everything will snap back into place. That was the silence that settled over my family as my grandmother's question, so simple, so innocent, hung in the air like a shard of glass waiting to fall. Did you like the new house? For a heartbeat, I felt unmoored. My eyes darted from face to face, searching for an anchor. My mother stared at the dessert plates with a ferocity that made me think she might shatter them with her gaze alone. My father cleared his throat, a sound that seemed far too loud in the stilled room. My sister, cheeks pale and eyes rimmed with guilt, reached for her glass of water, hands trembling just enough to make the ice clink against the side. Only my grandmother met my eyes, her expression open, waiting, the tiniest shadow of confusion tugging at her features as she really realized that I didn't know what she was talking about. I had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who tried to smooth the edges, to find common ground even when it meant sacrificing my own needs. But something inside me cracked then, not loudly, not with the fanfare of anger, but with the quiet, devastating certainty of someone who has finally had enough. I let the silence stretch. Let the discomfort pull around us, because for once, it wasn't my job to make things easier for everyone else. The tension became unbearable. Finally, my mother looked up, lips pressed into a thin, determined line. Emily, I told you about the house. We talked about it over the summer, remember? You said you weren't ready for the responsibility. Her voice was brittle in the way porcelain is right before it breaks. I stared at her, unblinking, willing her to see how much that hurt. No, Mom, I replied, my voice almost steady. You never asked, you never even told me it was happening. I found out just now. The same as everyone else, the room seemed to shrink around us, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what would come next. My father, always eager to find the logical explanation, stepped in, his tone falsely reasonable. You were so busy, and every time we tried to reach you, you didn't pick up. We thought maybe you weren't interested in coming back here. Not really. There it was. That same old refrain. I was the distant one, the distracted one, the one who couldn't be trusted to stay. My sister shifted in her seat. Misery etched into every line of her body. She wouldn't look at me, just twisted her napkin in her lap. I moved in last month, she whispered. The confession almost lost in the clatter of a dropped fork. they said you'd already said no, that you were off doing your own thing, that you didn't care. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. Tried to find the words to bridge the impossible distance that had opened up between us. All I could manage was a broken, "I wish you'd asked, I would have, I don't know. I just wanted to be part of it." For the first time, I saw my parents flinch, not physically, but in that subtle way people do when the truth is finally too heavy to carry. My mother's hand found her wine glass, her knuckles white. My father looked away, jaw working as he searched for something, an excuse, a lifeline, anything that might make this less unbearable. "It was easier this way, Emily," my mother said, voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't want to hurt your feelings. We thought you'd outgrown this place, that you'd moved on. But that wasn't it. Not really." I saw it now, so clearly. I wondered how I'd ever missed it. They hadn't wanted to deal with my disappointment, my questions, the messiness of my emotions. It was easier to write me out of the story than to risk me wanting something they weren't prepared to give. My grandmother, silent all this time, suddenly spoke, her voice quiet but commanding, her gaze unwavering. "That house was for Emily, that was the promise." The words landed with a finality that made everyone at the table freeze. It was never about who needed it more, it was about honoring my word. "I put my trust in you to do that." The weight of her disappointment hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. I felt tears prick my eyes, not just for myself but for her, for the betrayal of trust, for the love that had been twisted and weaponized to serve someone else's narrative. My sister finally met my gaze, her own eyes wet with shame. "I'm sorry, Em, I should have talked to you. I didn't want to lose their approval. I guess I thought maybe this would finally make them proud of me." There it was, raw and unvarnished, the truth, that both of us had been fighting for scraps of love, that neither of us felt truly seen. I wanted to rage at her, to shout and storm and make her feel even a fraction of what I was feeling, but instead, I just nodded, too tired for anger, too hollowed out for blame. We were both casualties of the same war, just on different sides of the battlefield. The rest of dessert was a blur. My parents tried to patch things up, offering apologies, laced with self-justification, promises to make it right, as if anything could undo what had already been done. I listened, numb, while my grandmother sat beside me, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. When the table was finally cleared and everyone drifted into their separate corners, I found myself staring out the window at the snow swirling in the darkness, the cold pressing against the glass. I thought about all the times I'd tried to earn my place in this family, about every compromise and silent surrender I'd made in the name of peace. And I realized, with a clarity that was both liberating and devastating, that I couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't a child begging to be chosen. I was a woman who had been betrayed, not just by the people I loved, but by the idea that love was something you could win if you were just good enough. I felt the old wounds, the longing, the self-doubt, the desperate hunger for approval begin to close, replaced by something harder, something sharper. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat with my grandmother by the dying fire. She held my hand, her thumb tracing soothing circles on my skin. "I'm so proud of you, Emmy," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You have no idea how strong you are." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take that strength and make it real, to use it as armor against the cold that had settled in my bones. And as the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room, I made myself a new kind of promise. I would not let this define me. I would find a way to reclaim what was mine, not just the house, but the sense of self I'd spent a lifetime doubting. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow kept falling, burying the world in silence. But inside, I felt the first stirrings of a different kind of peace, a fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find my own way home. The morning after the dinner, the house felt different, not just quieter but emptied out, as if the truth aired at the table had driven out whatever warmth or pretense had been clinging to the walls. I walked through the halls early, bare feet cold against the polished wood, listening to the sounds of a family trying not to collide, my mother's cautious footsteps in the kitchen, my father's murmured phone call behind a closed door, my sister's stifled sobs drifting from the bedroom she now called hers. It would have been easy to hate her then, easy to let all my pain harden into something sharp and directed, to name her the villain and let my anger draw a line between us that could never be crossed. But as I stood outside her door, hand hovering over the frame, I heard the raw edge of her crying, fragile, breathless, the kind of weeping you do when you're afraid of being heard. For a moment, I remembered us as children, the games we invented, the secrets we kept from grown-ups, the way we'd once been each other's shelter from our parents' moods and ambitions. Back then, it was us against the world before life taught us that sometimes the people you love most are the ones who draw the sharpest lines. I knocked, softly, and she told me to come in. The room was already different, her clothes in the closet, her framed photographs on the desk, her signature perfume hanging in the air. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled to her chest. Red-eyed and exhausted, for a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat in the thick, uncomfortable quiet of two sisters trying to find their way back to each other after a war neither of them started. When she finally did speak, her voice was so small I almost didn't recognize it. I didn't want it to happen like this, I swear. I thought you didn't care. That's what they told me. You always seemed like you wanted to get away, to be somewhere else. I didn't know it mattered to you. I tried to answer, but the words caught. The truth was, she'd believed what she'd been told because it fit with the story my parents liked to talk about me, the wild one, the restless one, the daughter whose dreams were always elsewhere. I realized then how powerful those stories can be, how easy it is to lose yourself in the roles other people write for you, until you barely recognize the sound of your own voice, sitting there. I wondered how much I'd done the same thing to her. How often had I cast her as the favorite, the golden child, the one who never had to fight for approval? How often had I let my jealousy or bitterness drown out the simple truth that she'd been struggling too, always trying to meet expectations she never asked for. It's a strange kind of loneliness, to feel you're competing for love that should be freely given. In that moment, I saw us both more clearly than I ever had, not as rivals, but as casualties of the same battle for affection, each of us wounded in ways we rarely showed. I did care. I finally said, I still do. It wasn't about the house. Not really. It was about being included, being trusted. I wish you'd asked. I wish they had. The words came out softer than I'd planned, but they were honest. I meant them. She looked at me, face crumpling. I'm sorry. I should have known better. I just wanted them to be proud of me for once. I wanted to feel chosen. Her confession landed heavy, the ache of it so familiar I could almost taste it. We sat together in silence, years of miscommunication stretching out between us like a road neither of us wanted to cross. The betrayal was real, but so was the shared pain. For the first time, I understood that forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't be a single moment, but a slow process. A daily act of choosing to see each other whole. Later, when I wandered downstairs, the house felt even emptier. My parents moved through the kitchen with the careful precision of people avoiding a minefield, their voices pitched low, their glances wary. My mother busied herself with chores, wiping the same spotless counter over and over, while my father hid behind his newspaper, the rustling pages a flimsy shield against the awkwardness they had created. When my grandmother arrived for morning tea, she found me staring out the back window, watching the wind sweep snow across the frozen yard. She set her mug down next to mine and waited, her patience a kind of permission. I spoke to your mother, she said finally. She told me what happened, or at least, her version of it. I'm so sorry, Emmy, I should have been clearer. I thought everyone understood what I wanted. It's not your fault, I replied, shaking my head. You kept your promise, it was them who didn't. She squeezed my hand. That's generous of you, but I know this hurts, and I know it feels like you lost something you can never get back. But you haven't, not really. They made their choice, but you still get to make yours. Her words stayed with me the rest of the day. I watched my family orbit around each other, each trying to pretend that things would soon go back to normal. My parents offered hollow apologies, couched in justifications how hard it was to decide, how much they worried, how they'd only ever wanted what was best. My sister hovered between us, desperate for reconciliation but unsure how to reach for it. I listened, nodded, let them speak, but inside I was somewhere else, sifting through the ashes of trust, searching for something worth salvaging. By afternoon, I'd grown tired of the performance. I put on my coat and boots and stepped out into the biting cold, letting the wind sting my cheeks, numb my fingers, remind me I was still alive. I wandered the neighborhood, remembering all the years I'd spent imagining a future in this place, a home that would finally be mine, where I could be myself without apology or explanation. I realized, as the sky darkened and the windows lit up behind me, that the house wasn't what I'd lost. It was the idea of family as something safe, unshakable, unconditional, that was the real casualty. But as I stood on the sidewalk, watching my breath curl in the freezing air, I felt something else, to a quiet resilience rising up, the stubborn belief that I could build something new out of the ruins. When I finally came back inside, my parents tried once more to make amends, promising to do better, to find a way to make things right. But I was done with bargaining. I thanked them for their concern, told them I needed time, and went upstairs to the guest room, my room for now. That night, I slept fitfully, dreams full of slammed doors and silent rooms. But I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt was still there, raw and pulsing, but so was the resolve. I wasn't going to beg for a place anymore. I would decide what happened next. The sun rose on a family forever changed. The outlines of our old roles blurred beyond recognition. I didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time, I trusted myself to face it, even if I had to do it alone. The days that followed were haunted by a fragile, uneasy peace. As if our family was tiptoeing around the fault lines we had created. My parents moved through the house with an anxious energy, clinging to routines, desperate to stitch the seams of normalcy back together. My sister grew quiet, her laughter gone, replaced by long walks and tear-stained phone calls. I could sense them all waiting for me to soften, to let things slide back into their old shapes, to play the role of the forgiving daughter once again. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. The old longing to be chosen, to be enough, had been hollowed out and replaced with something calmer, more certain. I no longer felt the need to prove myself worthy of love I should never have had to earn. I watched my parents and my sister with a kind of distant compassion, seeing them not as villains, but as flawed, fearful people just as lost as I was. Their choices hurt me, yes. But I no longer felt obligated to make it easy for them. My grandmother visited often. Her presence a quiet anchor. She reminded me, with gentle words and steady affection, that the house was still mine, that promises made in love matter even when others tried to rewrite them. Each day, I found myself a little stronger, a little less invisible, the ground beneath me slowly becoming solid again. In the evenings, I'd sit by the window, watching the snow erase the paths outside, and let myself imagine a future where I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval, where I could simply exist whole and unashamed in a home that was finally, truly mine. The wounds were still there, but so was the possibility of healing, a life rebuilt not on borrowed love, but on the quiet certainty of my own worth. It was a bitterly cold afternoon when my grandmother called me into the sitting room. Away from the uneasy choreography of my parents and sister, she sat me down and, with that gentle authority only she possessed, placed a thin envelope in my hand. Inside were documents, copies of the legal papers she'd signed weeks before the house was ever handed over. My name stood bold and clear on every page, the ink a silent affirmation of the trust she'd always placed in me. She explained, her voice steady, that she'd made sure no transfer could happen without my consent. There was a clause, quiet, unassuming, but ironclad, that required my signature for any change of ownership. It was her way of protecting not just the house, but me, from the casual betrayals of those who should have loved me better. I listened, heart pounding, as she told me she'd suspected my parents might try to decide for me, but she'd wanted me to have the final say. For a long moment, I sat in stunned silence, the enormity of her faith in me washing over every old bruise left by my parents' doubts. I realized, then, that even when the world seemed to conspire to make me small, there had always been someone quietly ensuring I would never be powerless. Gratitude, fierce and unyielding, swelled inside me. My grandmother had given me not just a house, but the chance to reclaim my story, to make a choice entirely my own. In her quiet way, she'd reminded me that love can be a shield as well as a gift, and sometimes the strongest protection comes from those who simply refuse to let you be erased. After learning about the clause in Grandma's gift, everything changed. The uneasy truce that had held us together began to crack as the truth seeped in. My parents, who had been so certain their decisions would stand unquestioned, now found themselves powerless. My house was not theirs to give away, and every excuse they'd offered fell apart under the light of my grandmother's quiet wisdom. For the first time, my sister looked truly lost. She paced the hallway, the weight of what had happened finally settling on her shoulders. My parents avoided my gaze, their voices tight with anxiety as they tried to discuss next step strategies. Apologies, appeals to reason, but it was clear the foundation had shifted. The authority they once wielded was gone, replaced by an awkward humility and the beginnings of regret. I watched them all from a distance, feeling strangely detached. As if I was seeing my family through new eyes, the power dynamic had reversed. But I didn't feel triumphant, just tired and, in some ways, free. I didn't have to fight for what was mine anymore. The fight was over. Trust, I realized, was not something that could be restored with a single conversation or gesture. It would have to be rebuilt, brick by careful brick. If it could be rebuilt at all, for now, I let the silence settle. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is to simply refuse to be erased. I woke the next morning with a sense of clarity that surprised me. The exhaustion and hurt were still there, but beneath them pulsed something steadier, a quiet resolve. I dressed, packed my few things, and moved through the house with a calm that felt almost unfamiliar. My parents hovered nearby, eyes watchful, uncertain if I would lash out or break down. My sister lingered at the stairs, clutching a mug, searching my face for forgiveness she hadn't yet earned, but I didn't offer drama or bitterness. I simply gathered my things and walked downstairs, pausing only when my grandmother caught my hand in hers. Her eyes, warm and unwavering, gave me strength. I didn't need to say anything. She understood. I squeezed her hand, a silent thank you for her unwavering belief in me. Without a single raised voice or tearful accusation, I stepped out into the cold morning, letting the door close quietly behind me. Each step away from that house felt like an unburdening, a letting go of old expectations, of roles I no longer wished to play. The air outside was sharp and clear, bracing against my cheeks, but I felt more alive than I had in years. I left behind the weight of needing to belong, carrying only what was truly mine, my dignity, my story, and the hope for something better. And as I walked away, I realized that sometimes, reclaiming your life isn't about confrontation, but about choosing to leave and never looking back. The next day, I returned to my house with the legal papers and a locksmith by my side. The sky was pale and still, the world hushed under a blanket of fresh snow. I watched as the old locks were replaced, each turn of the screw feeling like a tiny act of defiance and freedom. There were no grand speeches, no audience to witness this moment, just me, the keys cold in my hand, and the slow, steady beat of my own heart inside. The rooms were empty, but I could finally breathe. The pain of betrayal lingered, but so did something stronger, peace. I wandered through the silent halls, sunlight streaming through the windows, and let myself imagine a future I could build on my own terms. For the first time, the house truly belonged to me, and so did my life. If you've ever felt pushed aside or underestimated by those closest to you, tell me your story in the comments. I read every word, and you're not alone. If this journey struck a chord, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to reclaim their voice. I pour my heart into every story, so if you believe in standing up for yourself, subscribe with just one click and join our community. Your support means the world, and together, we can turn pain into power.